So to create this cutscene, first thing I did was I created an empty game object. And with that, if you go in the timeline window, you can automatically create a timeline with that object. So here's my timeline. And it's just like any video editing software where you can see the timeline and have many different things that turn off or turn on or animate over time. So how it starts is I have the first camera. The main camera is active, and it has its own virtual camera as well. And I just, in the animation of that virtual camera, I just changed the position from the starting position to the ending position, so it does this nice pan effect. So all you need to do is attach a animator to that object in order to get that kind of effect in the timeline. Simultaneously, I have the player coming through the gate and moving forward. So these are the keyframes of that. The player moves forward up into here, and then the head turns left and the head turns right, and then the player turns and looks at the frog as it comes. So these are just motions that I added in as you would add any animation. If you click this record button, you can select the object in the scene view and move it around, and it will record those keyframes as you go along, same way you would do any animation. And then overriding that, you can add this thing called an override. So this is the main player animation aspect of the timeline, and you can click this and go add override track. So this allows you to do simultaneous animations. So there's the movement here and the override of the idle animation there. So the character is bouncing in its idle animation and also moving. And you can swap these. Most of the time I think people do the animation in the main one and the override is the movement. But this is just how I ended up doing it. So as we go, we see the camera switches here. So that's where we have this active animation, this active, what's it called? Activation track. So this just allows you to turn objects on or off. So some of these are animation tracks, some of these are activation tracks, and so that's where it switches between main camera 1 and main camera 2. And so then the dialogue starts. Another thing here is in the frog movement. Same way, I did a recorded movement from his starting position, which is about here, to his ending position. I turned on his walk animation, and then I blended it out so that it can fade into the next animation, which is idle, so that it doesn't chop or get stuck. See? So he easily switches in the animations there. For the dialogue, I have already a built dialogue system made by my colleague Jeff. And so what I've done is I've just extended that system to work here in the cutscene itself. So here's just the beginning of it. And now the dialogue starts. So I have this object called cutscene dialogue, which activates, and it's basically a script that just runs on activation. So I'll show you behind the scenes for this code. So all I have is the activation part of this. There's nothing else for this. Everything happens programmatically. So if we switch over, this is the dialogue script. So generally how it was working before was if the player was nearby an NPC and pressed the E, then it would trigger the dialogue. I also added a new way of just having a trigger Boolean, so that my script could trigger this and then it could start. Instead of having to have it triggered by a player, it will just be triggered programmatically. So that's how it starts. And before that, actually, I want to share, I made a timeline dialogue manager. So this stores all of the different dialogue lines and loops through them in the dialogue system. So let me just go back here. In my cutscene dialogue object, I have my timeline dialogue manager. And so I have a scriptable object that holds the information for who is speaking and what they're saying. So if I go here in my scriptable objects folder into the NPCs of cutscene 1, I've ordered them 1 frob, 2 player, 3 frob. So this is the order that they happen in. So each object has the portrait, the name, and the lines that they speak. So this is the whole dialogue that happens, and it can have multiple lines come for each character as well. So in the timeline dialogue manager, I've made that list in order of how the sequence of the dialogue back and forth. I also made 2 separate dialogue panels in the UI, left and right, so that it can differentiate a little bit between the 2 characters. So I refer to those here in my canvas. I have this dialogue panel and dialogue panel right, and they both look pretty much the same. There's the right one, and there's the left one. And they both have the same names for everything inside because we reference these by names. Profile, name, dialogue. Okay, so back in this, we also have a reference to the dialogue manager. So this is the original dialogue script. This is basically the script that goes through one of these scriptable objects and prints out the text letter by letter and line by line. So this script manages one of these, and basically when this script is done, then this timeline dialogue manager will switch to the next one and then again run this script. And it will populate, this timeline dialogue manager populates all of the attributes of that dialogue manager script. So we have, it will take from this each scriptable object as it goes through. It will take the picture, the portrait, it will take the lines, it will take all the info, and it populates it there. And then it switches back and forth between the dialogue panels, left and right. So this is where it sets from 0 to 1 back to 0 as it goes in between. So this is just a simple manager. Then we get into the dialogue class. So when it starts, it basically resets everything and starts the coroutine for typing. So for typing, it goes through all the lines of the NPC info and writes them letter by letter and according to this word speed. So it waits for 0.05 seconds in between each letter. And when it's done, then it goes to start typing. So it keeps typing, and then when it's done, it will check, okay, has it reached the end of the line? And if so, then it'll go to this countdown. So the countdown is just to give it a few seconds after the whole line has been typed so that it's readable. So then it goes to the countdown, and it checks a certain number of seconds, it waits, and then it goes to next line. Next line pulls up the next line of text and starts the coroutine of typing again. And if we've reached all of the lines of text, then it would reset the text. Reset the text means that it just goes to the next the next scriptable object's worth of dialogue. So it sets everything, resets everything, and goes to the next dialogue. Next dialogue is, this is the timeline dialogue manager call. So if we're using a timeline dialogue manager, then it will trigger this next dialogue. And then it'll switch to the next scriptable object and keep going from there. So that's basically how how the dialogue works. So in my timeline, I have it start and it just basically completely runs, and I have automatically set the duration of this active to be right when the dialogue ends. But the dialogue happens kind of independently from this timeline. So I have automatically, I have manually set the duration here based on how long this lasts. Because if you set if you change the speed of text and everything like this will happen faster or this will happen slower, and that doesn't get mirrored here. It doesn't happen here, it just happens programmatically. So you have to kind of check and align things as to when the dialogue actually ends. Okay, so they're talking, and eventually it gets to a point where the dialogue ends. He says, "Here, take this," and gives a coin bag. So I turn off the dialogue and turn on the coin bag, and it goes over to him like that. And then a new dialogue starts. So I have two cutscene dialogues here, and both of them, the first one is for the first set of dialogue, and the second one is for the second set, and that's it. So that's pretty much how the timeline works. And you'll see also just at the end, I switch back to the original camera, and I have the player and NPC separate, so we'll see that happen in a second. It's still not perfect, not the best. Oops. I want to zoom in on this. It won't let me. But it's so far so good. So yeah, I'm happy with what happened so far. There's the final switch, and then we're now starting the game. The player moves forward, and now the timeline is ended. So it just, one more thing actually I want to share. So now it's all playable. At the end, in the timeline, I have a small script here called Timeline Controller, and this I attached to the timeline. And it just has this function you can use called onTimelineFinished. And so once the timeline is done, you can do whatever code you want. So I just added some fields here for the cameras and the HUD. So I just set those to active once the timeline is finished, so that the game can start properly with all the things enabled. So that's the last little thing that I did. And now it's ready. So yeah, that's how I made a cutscene. And hope it helps, hope it's clear, and happy to share this with you.